I'm Dr. Michael Harrison, and after 18 years as a cardiologist in Chicago's busiest emergency rooms, I thought I had seen it all. Hearts that refused to quit, patients who defied every odd, miracles that could be explained by science and determination. But one night last October changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the thin line between them. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday evening when the call came through. I was finishing my notes from a routine procedure, the kind of quiet moment that rarely lasts long in cardiac care. The emergency department was buzzing with its usual controlled chaos, monitors beeping, nurses moving with purpose, residents discussing cases in hushed tones. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee when my pager went off with the code that makes every cardiologist's heart skip. Cardiac arrest. Incoming. You know, after nearly 2 decades in this field, I've developed what my colleagues call an unshakable calm. I've held the hands of dying patients, delivered devastating news to families, and made split-second decisions that determined whether someone would see another sunrise. My wife often jokes that nothing surprises me anymore, that I've become too clinical, too detached. She wasn't entirely wrong. Somewhere along the way, I had built walls around my emotions, believing it made me a better doctor. Professional distance, they call it. But that night, those walls would crumble. The ambulance arrived at 10:15. I could hear the sirens cutting through the Chicago night before I saw the flashing lights pull into our bay. The paramedics were already performing CPR as they wheeled him in, a man in his late 50s, unconscious, his skin that telltale gray color that every emergency physician knows too well. Behind the stretcher came his family, a woman in her early 50s, his wife I assumed, her face streaked with tears, and 2 grown children, a son and daughter, both trying to hold themselves together while their world fell apart. "What do we have?" I asked the lead paramedic as we moved quickly toward Trauma Bay 3. "Robert Chen, 57 years old," she reported breathlessly, never breaking the rhythm of compressions. "Witnessed cardiac arrest at home around 9:30. Wife found him collapsed in their living room. We've been working on him for 45 minutes. No pulse, no response to 3 rounds of epi. V-fib initially, now a systole. 45 minutes. In cardiac medicine, we have what we call the golden hour, but in reality, every minute that passes without circulation dramatically reduces the chances of survival. After 20 minutes, brain damage becomes almost inevitable. After 30, you're fighting against odds that would make Vegas bookmakers laugh. 45 minutes? I'd seen enough cases to know where this was heading, but I never let that show in front of families. "Okay, let's take over," I said, moving to the head of the bed. "Transfer compressions on my count. 1, 2, 3. The room erupted into coordinated chaos. Nurses connected monitor leads, started IV lines, drew blood for labs. A respiratory therapist bagged oxygen into his lungs while a resident took over chest compressions. I grabbed my stethoscope and listened to his heart. Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Before I continue with more details about this case, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Stories like this one reach farther than you imagine, and knowing you're there with me makes this feel less like medicine and more like sharing something sacred. Robert Chen. That was his name, though I wouldn't learn his full story until later. Right now, he was just another case, another battle against time and biology. But as I looked at the monitors, flat lines where there should have been the peaks and valleys of life, I knew this was going to be one of those nights that tests everything you believe about medicine, about hope, about the thin line between fighting and letting go. Mrs. Chen stood in the corner of the trauma bay, her hands pressed against her mouth, watching every move we made. Her daughter, maybe 25 years old, had her arm around her mother's shoulders, whispering something I couldn't hear. The son, probably in his late 20s, kept asking questions. "Is he going to be okay? What can you do? Please, you have to save him." I've learned that families need hope, but they also need truth. The art of emergency medicine isn't just about treating patients. It's about knowing how much reality people can handle at any given moment. Right now, watching Robert's lifeless form on the gurney, I knew I had to buy time while we did everything medically possible. "We're going to do everything we can," I told them, which was true. "But I need you to give us some space to work." A nurse gently guided the family to a nearby waiting room, but I could still see Mrs. Chen through the glass partition, her eyes never leaving the trauma bay. In 18 years, I'd watched thousands of families hold their breath like this, waiting for news that would either rebuild their world or shatter it completely. I turned my attention back to Robert. His pupils were fixed and dilated, no response to light whatsoever. His skin was cold to the touch, that waxy gray color that speaks to prolonged oxygen deprivation. Every clinical indicator told the same story. This man had been without circulation for far too long. "How long have we been working on him total?" I asked. 52 minutes since initial arrest, the nurse responded, checking her watch. 52 minutes. In medical school, they teach you about brain death, about the irreversible damage that occurs when oxygen doesn't reach vital organs. 4 to 6 minutes without circulation and brain cells start dying. Beyond 15 minutes, permanent disability is almost guaranteed. We were approaching an hour. I ordered another round of medications, epinephrine, atropine, everything in our protocol arsenal. Sometimes the heart needs that extra chemical push to remember how to beat. But deep down, I knew we were going through motions now. The monitors showed what we call a systole, a flat line that cardiologists learn to recognize as the heart's final surrender. Dr. Harrison, the resident working compressions, looked up at me, sweat beading on his forehead from the physical exertion. "Should we continue?" It's the question that haunts every emergency physician. When do you stop fighting? When do you accept that medicine has reached its limits? When do you tell a family that their loved one isn't coming home? I looked through the glass at Mrs. Chen. She was holding what looked like a small photograph, probably of Robert, probably from happier times. Their daughter was on the phone, likely calling other family members, preparing them for news that would change everything. "Give me 2 more rounds," I said. Full protocol. The room continued its choreographed dance of medical intervention. More medications pushed through IV lines, more compressions pumping a heart that refused to respond, more breaths forced into lungs that couldn't process them. We were fighting biology itself now, fighting the fundamental reality that bodies have limits. At 11:08, almost exactly an hour after Robert Chen's initial cardiac arrest, I made the decision that every doctor dreads. I raised my hand, and the room fell silent. "That's enough," I said quietly. "Let's call it." The machines fell silent except for the ventilator, which continued its mechanical rhythm until I nodded to the respiratory therapist to turn it off. In the sudden quiet, you could hear everything. The distant sound of other patients in the emergency department, the hum of overhead lights, the muffled sound of Mrs. Chen crying through the glass. I checked my watch and prepared to do what I'd done too many times before. Walk into that waiting room and deliver the news that would divide their lives into before and after. Before Robert died. After we lost him. But as I moved toward the door to speak with the family, something made me pause. Call it instinct, call it professional thoroughness. But I decided to listen to his heart one more time. Sometimes, in that moment after we stop all intervention, you can hear things more clearly. The true silence of death, the final confirmation that we'd done everything possible. I placed my stethoscope on Robert Chen's chest, expecting to hear nothing but the hollow silence I'd heard 1,000 times before. Instead, what I heard would change everything I thought I knew about the boundaries between life and... At first, I thought I was imagining it. A faint sound. So quiet I convinced myself it was just the echo of my own heartbeat through the stethoscope. I moved the instrument to different positions on his chest, listening carefully. Nothing. Complete silence. I was about to pull away when I heard it again, a single soft thump. I froze. In 18 years of cardiology, you learn to trust your ears above everything else. The human heart has a distinctive sound, a rhythm that's unmistakable when you know what to listen for. But this couldn't be right. Robert Chen had been without circulation for over an hour. The monitors showed a flat line. His pupils were fixed. Every clinical sign pointed to death. "Wait," I whispered, not moving the stethoscope. The room was still silent, the nurses cleaning up equipment, the resident charting our failed attempts at resuscitation. No one else had heard what I thought I'd heard. Then it happened again. Thump. Pause. Thump. My hands started trembling. I looked up at the cardiac monitor. still showing that devastating flat line that had been taunting us for the past hour. But stethoscopes don't lie. What I was hearing through that instrument was the unmistakable sound of a heart beginning to beat. "Get back over here," I called out to the team, my voice cracking slightly. "Everyone, back to the bedside, now." The nurse closest to me looked confused. "Doctor, we already called it." "Should I get the family?" "Not yet," I said, never moving my stethoscope from Robert's chest. "Something's happening here." The resident who had been doing compressions looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Dr. Harrison, we worked on him for over an hour. His pupils are fixed. He's been down too long." "Listen," I interrupted, pulling the stethoscope from my ears and handing it to him. "Put this on his chest and tell me what you hear." He took the stethoscope reluctantly, clearly thinking his attending physician had finally cracked under the pressure. But as he placed it on Robert's chest, his expression changed completely. His eyes went wide, and he looked up at me with a mixture of disbelief and fear. That's impossible," he whispered. "What do you hear?" I asked. "It sounds like a heartbeat. But that can't be right." The monitor, as if responding to our conversation, the cardiac monitor suddenly erupted with sound. The flat line that had been mocking us for the past hour began to show small blips, then larger ones. Within seconds, we were looking at an unmistakable cardiac rhythm on the screen. The room exploded into controlled chaos again. But this time it was different. This wasn't the desperate energy of trying to save a dying patient. This was the stunned, almost fearful energy of witnessing something that shouldn't be possible. "Check his pulse," I ordered, though I was already reaching for his wrist myself. There it was. Weak, but unmistakably present. A pulse. After more than an hour without circulation, Robert Chen had a pulse. "Blood pressure?" I called out. I'm getting 80/50, the nurse responded, her voice filled with disbelief. "Pupils?" Another nurse shined a penlight into his eyes. They're reactive. Sluggish, but reactive." I stood there, staring at the monitors, trying to process what I was witnessing. In medical school, they teach you about the impossible cases, the one-in-a-million scenarios that make it into textbooks. But they also teach you that after a certain point, brain death is irreversible. Hearts don't spontaneously restart after an hour of a systole. Brains don't recover after prolonged oxygen deprivation. Yet here was Robert Chen, his heart beating steadily on the monitor, his blood pressure climbing slowly but surely, his pupils responding to light. Every few seconds, I expected the monitors to go silent again, for this to reveal itself as some cruel glitch in our equipment. But the rhythm continued, strong and regular. "What do we do?" the resident asked me, and I realized that for the first time in my career, I truly didn't know. "We treat him like any other post-arrest patient," I said, though my voice lacked the confidence I usually projected. "Get a full set of vitals, draw blood gases, chest x-ray, 12-lead EKG, and someone page the ICU. He's going to need intensive monitoring." As the team sprang into action around Robert's bedside, I found myself staring through the glass partition at his family. Mrs. Chen was still sitting in the waiting room, clutching that photograph, preparing herself for the worst news of her life. Her children were on either side of her, their faces etched with grief. How do you tell a family that their loved one, who was clinically dead for over an hour, has somehow come back to life? I walked toward the waiting room, my mind racing through every possible medical explanation. Maybe the medications had taken longer to work than usual. Maybe there had been some minimal circulation we hadn't detected. Maybe our monitors had malfunctioned. But even as I ran through these rational possibilities, I knew none of them truly explained what I'd just witnessed. Mrs. Chen looked up as I approached, her eyes red from crying, but still holding that last thread of hope that families cling to in these moments. "Doctor?" she said, standing up slowly. "Is he?" "Mrs. Chen," I began, then paused. "How do you explain the impossible? Your husband's heart has started beating again." The words hung in the air between us. She stared at me, not understanding, not quite believing. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You said the machines showed." "I know what we said. I know what the monitors showed. But sometimes Medicine encounters things that can't be fully explained by our textbooks or our protocols. Your husband's heart is beating. He's breathing on his own. We're taking him to intensive care for monitoring. But Mrs. Chen, he's alive. Her daughter gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Her son stood frozen, as if afraid that moving might break whatever spell had brought his father back. Mrs. Chen looked through the glass partition toward the trauma bay, where Robert was now surrounded by nurses preparing him for transport to the ICU. The monitors showed steady vital signs, the rhythmic beeping that had been absent for over an hour. "Can I see him?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "But Mrs. Chen, I need you to understand, we don't know what this means yet. We don't know if there's been any brain damage or what his recovery might look like. What happened tonight? It's not something we see in medicine. Ever." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't really processing my warnings. She was focused on one simple, overwhelming truth. Her husband, who had been dead, was alive. As we walked toward Robert's bedside, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about the science I'd devoted my life to. Mrs. Chen's hand trembled as she reached for her husband's fingers. The moment she touched him, she let out a sob that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. "He's warm," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe it. "Robert, I'm here. I'm here, sweetheart." I watched the monitors carefully. Robert's blood pressure had stabilized at 90/60. Not perfect, but certainly compatible with life. His oxygen saturation was climbing steadily. Most remarkably, his heart rhythm was not only present, but surprisingly organized for someone who had just experienced such prolonged cardiac arrest. "Dr. Harrison," one of the ICU nurses approached me. "Room 314 is ready. Should we transfer him now?" I nodded, but kept my stethoscope on Robert's chest. The heart sounds were getting stronger by the minute. In all my years of medicine, I'd never heard anything quite like it, a heart that seemed to be remembering how to live. As we prepared Robert for transport to the intensive care unit, his eyelids began to flutter. Mrs. Chen gasped and squeezed his hand tighter. "Robert, can you hear me?" For a moment, nothing. Then, slowly, his eyes opened. They were unfocused at first, the way eyes look when someone is emerging from deep sedation. But then they found his wife's face, and something incredible happened. He tried to speak. No words came out because of the breathing tube we'd placed, but his lips moved in what looked unmistakably like Linda. His wife's name. "Oh my God," Linda Chen breathed. "He knows me. He knows me." I felt a chill run down my spine. After over an hour without circulation, patients who survive typically face months of rehabilitation, if they wake up at all. Many suffer permanent brain damage, memory loss, or worse. But Robert Chen was not only conscious, he was recognizing his wife and attempting to communicate. "We need to get him upstairs," I said, though part of me wanted to stay and witness whatever was happening here. "Mrs. Chen, you can ride with us to the ICU." The elevator ride to the 14th floor was surreal. Robert's eyes tracked movement in the elevator, following the floor numbers as they lit up. His vital signs remained stable, his heart continuing its steady rhythm that shouldn't have been possible. In the ICU, we transferred Robert to a bed equipped with every monitoring device modern medicine could provide. Within minutes, we had continuous cardiac monitoring, blood pressure measurements, brain activity sensors, and a dozen other instruments tracking every aspect of his physiology. Dr. Patricia Williams, the ICU attending, met us at the bedside. I'd worked with Patricia for 8 years, and she was one of the most rational, evidence-based physicians I knew. When I explained what had happened in the emergency department, her expression grew increasingly skeptical. "Michael, let me make sure I understand," she said quietly, pulling me aside while the nurses got Robert settled. "You're telling me this man was in a systole for over an hour, and then spontaneously converted to a normal rhythm?" "I know how it sounds," I replied. "But Patricia, I was there. We worked on him for 63 minutes. Complete asystole, fixed pupils, no pulse. We called the code. And then, as I was doing my final assessment, his heart just started." She looked at the monitors showing Robert's steady cardiac rhythm, then back at me. "There has to be a medical explanation. Maybe the medications had a delayed effect. Maybe there was some minimal circulation we couldn't detect. Maybe, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Run whatever tests you think are necessary. EEG, CT scan, echo, labs, everything. Over the next few hours, Robert Chen became the most thoroughly tested patient in the hospital. The results, when they came back, only deepened the mystery. His brain CT showed no signs of oxygen damage. None. After more than an hour without circulation, there should have been clear evidence of brain injury, but the scan looked completely normal. His echocardiogram showed a heart that was functioning normally, with no signs of the damage typically seen after prolonged cardiac arrest. His blood work, which should have shown massive cellular damage from oxygen deprivation, was remarkably normal. By 3 a.m, Robert was fully conscious and breathing on his own. We'd removed the breathing tube, and he was talking, not just single words, but full sentences. His memory appeared intact. He knew his name, his wife's name, his children's names, where he lived, what year it was. I remember feeling chest pain, he told me as I examined him in the early morning hours. I was watching television with Linda, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. The pain was like someone driving a truck over my chest. I called for Linda and then, nothing. I don't remember anything after that until I woke up here. His neurological exam was completely normal. His reflexes, his coordination, his cognitive function, everything you'd expect to be damaged after prolonged oxygen deprivation was functioning perfectly. Linda Chen hadn't left his bedside. She sat in a chair next to his bed, holding his hand, occasionally touching his face as if to convince herself he was really there. Their children had arrived around midnight, and the reunion was something I'll never forget. "Dad, we thought we lost you," his daughter whispered through tears. The doctors said, "I'm here," Robert said simply. "I don't know why, but I'm here." By dawn, word of Robert's case had spread through the hospital. Other physicians came by to see the man who had been dead for over an hour and then came back to life with no apparent ill effects. Some offered medical explanations: hypothermia slowing metabolism, unusual drug reactions, equipment malfunction. But none of the explanations truly fit the facts. Dr. James Patterson, the chief of cardiology, pulled me aside during morning rounds. "Michael, I've reviewed the case. I've looked at the strips, the documentation, talked to the paramedics. What happened last night doesn't fit any medical paradigm I know." "So what do we tell people?" I asked. "We tell them the truth," he said. "Sometimes medicine encounters cases that challenge everything we think we know. Robert Chen is alive, he's neurologically intact, and medically speaking that should be impossible. But impossible or not, he's sitting upstairs talking to his family." As I finished my shift that morning, I stopped by Robert's room one more time. He was sitting up in bed, eating breakfast, looking like any other recovering cardiac patient except for one thing. He was alive when every law of medicine said he should be dead. "Dr. Harrison," he called out as I appeared in the doorway. "Thank you. Linda told me what you did, how hard you worked." I walked over to his bedside, still struggling to process what I'd witnessed. "Robert, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully. During the time when your heart wasn't beating, did you experience anything? Did you see anything? Hear anything?" He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. Then he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, peaceful, but also somehow knowing. "Doctor, I don't remember seeing lights or tunnels or anything like that," he said slowly. "But I will tell you this, I wasn't afraid. Even though I don't remember it, somehow I knew I wasn't alone." Those words stayed with me as I drove home that morning. Chicago was waking up around me. People heading to work, children walking to school, life continuing its normal rhythm. But nothing felt normal anymore. I kept replaying the night in my mind, searching for some rational explanation that would let me file this case away in a neat medical category. But there wasn't one. When I walked into my house, my wife Sarah was making coffee in the kitchen. She took one look at my face and knew something had happened. "Rough night?" she asked, though she'd asked that question hundreds of times over our 15-year marriage. "Sarah," I said, sitting down at our kitchen table, "something happened last night that I can't explain." I told her everything. Robert's cardiac arrest, The hour of failed resuscitation. The moment his heart spontaneously started beating. His complete neurological recovery. As I spoke, I watched her expression change from concern to disbelief, to something approaching awe. "Michael," she said when I finished, "in 18 years you've never told me about a case like this. Because in 18 years I've never seen a case like this." She was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What do you think happened?" "Medically, I have no idea. The tests show no brain damage, no cardiac damage, no cellular damage that should have occurred after prolonged oxygen deprivation. By every measure we have, Robert Chen should either be dead or severely brain damaged. Instead, he's sitting in the ICU eating breakfast and asking about when he can go home." "But what do you think happened?" she pressed. I looked out our kitchen window at the morning light filtering through the trees. "I think I witnessed something that medicine can't fully explain. And I think that scares me more than I want to admit." Over the next 3 days, Robert's recovery continued to defy medical logic. Every test came back normal. His cardiac function was excellent. His neurological status remained completely intact. By Thursday morning, we were discussing discharge plans. The story of Robert Chen began to spread beyond our hospital. Other physicians called to discuss the case. Medical journals expressed interest in publishing case reports. A few news outlets picked up the story, though we protected Robert's privacy as much as possible. But for me, the most profound changes were personal. I found myself questioning assumptions I'd held for nearly 2 decades. In medical school, we're taught to believe in evidence-based medicine, in the power of science to explain and treat human illness. We're taught to be skeptical of anything that can't be measured, quantified, and reproduced. Robert Chen's case challenged all of that. On Thursday evening, as I prepared to discharge him home, Robert asked to speak with me privately. His family stepped out of the room, and we sat together in the quiet ICU, surrounded by the same monitors that had shown his flat line just 4 days earlier. "Doctor, I want to thank you for not giving up," he said. "Linda told me you worked on me for over an hour. She said most doctors would have stopped sooner. Robert, I have to be honest with you. We did stop. We called your time of death. What happened after that? I still don't have a medical explanation for it." He nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that. About what it means." "What do you think it means?" "I think sometimes life has plans that are bigger than our understanding. I think sometimes we're meant to be here for reasons we might not see right away." As if to prove his point, Robert's daughter appeared in the doorway. "Dad, there's someone here to see you." A young woman in her 20s entered the room, someone I didn't recognize. She looked nervous, almost fearful. "Mr. Chen?" she said hesitantly. "My name is Sarah Martinez. I was the paramedic who worked on you Tuesday night." Robert's face lit up. "Please, come in. Sit down." Sarah sat in the chair beside his bed, her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Chen, I need to tell you something. In 8 years as a paramedic, I've worked hundreds of cardiac arrests. When someone's been down as long as you were, we don't usually see outcomes like this." "I understand I'm very lucky," Robert said gently. "That's just it," Sarah continued, her voice cracking slightly. "I've been struggling with my job lately. I've been thinking about quitting. Too many people we can't save, too many families we can't help. Tuesday night, working on you for so long with no response, I was ready to give up on this career entirely." She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. "But then I heard what happened. I heard that you came back, that you're okay. And I realized that sometimes we don't get to see the full story. Sometimes we plant seeds that grow in ways we never expect." Robert reached out and took her hand. "Sarah, you saved my life. You and Dr. Harrison, and everyone who worked on me. The fact that my heart started beating again doesn't take away from what you did. You kept me alive long enough for whatever miracle happened to happen." I watched this exchange with growing understanding. Robert's case wasn't just about one impossible medical recovery. It was about the ripple effects of hope, about how one inexplicable event could touch the lives of everyone involved. Sarah stayed for another 20 minutes, and by the time she left, she looked like a different person. The hopelessness I'd seen in her eyes when she arrived had been replaced by something else. Purpose, maybe. Or renewed faith in the work she'd chosen. That night, I called my own daughter, Emma, who was in her second year of medical school. We'd had countless conversations about medicine over the years, but this one was different. "Dad, you sound different," she said after I'd told her about Robert's case. "Different how?" "Less certain. But also more human." She was right. For years, I'd approached medicine with the confidence that came from knowledge and experience. I'd prided myself on being unflappable, on having answers, on being the steady presence that families could rely on in their worst moments. Robert Chen's case had humbled me in ways I was still processing. "Emma," I said, "when you become a doctor, you'll learn about evidence-based medicine, about the importance of science and data and reproducible results. And all of that is crucial. But I want you to remember something else. Sometimes you'll encounter cases that don't fit the textbooks. Sometimes you'll witness things that challenge everything you think you know about medicine and life and death. What do you do when that happens? You stay humble. You admit that medicine, for all its advances, still encounters mysteries. And you remember that being a doctor isn't just about understanding the science of human bodies, it's about honoring the mystery of human life." Friday morning, Robert Chen was discharged home. He walked out of the hospital on his own, his wife beside him, his children carrying flowers from well-wishers. As I watched him leave, I realized that I would never be quite the same physician I'd been before that Tuesday night. 6 months later, I received a letter that would complete the transformation that began the night Robert Chen came back to life. The envelope was addressed in careful handwriting, and inside was a photograph of Robert standing in what looked like a community garden, surrounded by children. He was wearing a volunteer t-shirt and holding a small plant, his face radiant with the kind of joy you see in people who have been given an unexpected second chance. The letter read, "Dear Dr. Harrison, I hope this finds you well. Linda and I wanted to update you on how things have been since that incredible night in October. As you can see from the photo, I've been volunteering with a program that teaches urban gardening to underprivileged kids here in Chicago. Something about almost dying made me realize how much life I'd been wasting on things that didn't really matter. These kids remind me every day what a gift it is to wake up each morning. But there's something else I wanted to tell you. Something I've been thinking about for months. You remember that paramedic, Sarah, who came to see me in the hospital? Well, she reached out to us a few weeks ago. Turns out she didn't quit her job after all. In fact, she's been promoted to training supervisor for new paramedics. She told us that my case reminded her why she became a paramedic in the first place. Not just to save lives, but to be part of something bigger than herself. Dr. Harrison, I don't know why my heart started beating again that night. I've thought about it every day since it happened. Maybe it was the medications, maybe it was some medical phenomenon that science will eventually explain, or maybe it was something else entirely. But what I do know is this. Whatever brought me back, it wasn't just for me. It was for Linda, for our kids, for Sarah, for those children in the garden, and maybe even for you. You told me once that medicine encounters mysteries. I think life is the same way. Sometimes things happen that we can't explain, but we can choose what to do with them. I choose to believe that second chances, however they come, are meant to be shared. Thank you for fighting for me, even when the fight seemed hopeless. Thank you for being the kind of doctor who doesn't give up, and for being humble enough to admit when something is beyond medical explanation. With endless gratitude, Robert Chen P.S. Linda sends her love. She says you'll always be part of our family's story, and we hope you know what an honor that is for us. I sat in my office reading that letter 3 times, and each time I felt something shift inside me. Robert was right. Whatever happened that night wasn't just about one man's impossible recovery. It was about how one inexplicable moment could ripple outward, touching lives in ways we might never fully understand. The changes in my own practice had been gradual but profound. I found myself spending more time actually listening to patients, not just to their symptoms but to their fears, their hopes, their stories. I began to see each person not just as a collection of medical problems to be solved, but as a human being carrying mysteries I might never fully comprehend. My relationship with uncertainty had transformed completely. Before Robert's case, uncertainty in medicine felt like failure, a gap in knowledge that needed to be filled. Now I understood that some uncertainty was actually sacred space, room for possibilities that medical textbooks couldn't contain. 3 months after receiving Robert's letter, I was invited to speak at a medical conference about unusual cardiac cases. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of physicians, I realized this was my chance to share something that might change how other doctors approached the mysteries they encountered in their own practices. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I want to tell you about a case that challenged everything I thought I knew about cardiology, about medicine, and about the boundaries between life and death." I told Robert's story in detail, the hour-long resuscitation, the flat line on the monitors, the moment his heart spontaneously began beating again, his complete neurological recovery. I showed the medical records, the test results, the documentation that proved this wasn't a case of false reporting or equipment malfunction. When I finished, the auditorium was silent. Then, slowly, hands began to rise. "Dr. Harrison," called out a physician from the third row, "what's your medical explanation for this outcome?" "I don't have one," I answered honestly, "and I've stopped trying to force one." Another hand. "But surely there must have been some physiological mechanism." "There might have been," I interrupted gently. "But here's what I've learned. Our need to explain everything medically sometimes prevents us from appreciating the full significance of what we've witnessed. Robert Chen is alive, neurologically intact, and living a meaningful life. Whether that happened because of delayed drug effects, some unknown physiological mechanism, or something beyond our current medical understanding, doesn't change the fundamental reality. Sometimes life returns when all evidence says it shouldn't." After my presentation, I was approached by dozens of physicians who wanted to share their own unexplained cases. An emergency physician told me about a patient who survived a massive stroke with no residual deficits. A pediatric oncologist described a child whose aggressive cancer disappeared without treatment. A trauma surgeon recounted a patient who survived injuries that should have been universally fatal. What struck me wasn't just the number of these cases, but how rarely doctors talked about them. We presented the cases we could explain, published papers about reproducible results, built our reputations on our ability to provide medical answers. But the cases that defied explanation? Those we whispered about in hallway conversations, filed away as anomalies, or simply forgot. That night, I realized that Robert Chen's gift to me wasn't just the reminder that medicine contains mysteries. It was the courage to embrace those mysteries as part of what makes medicine, and life, sacred. I started ending my shifts differently after. Instead of rushing home, I began taking a few minutes to sit quietly in my office, reflecting on the day. What had I witnessed? What had I learned? What mysteries had I encountered, even in the most routine cases? The practice of medicine, I realized, isn't just about applying scientific knowledge to human problems. It's about bearing witness to the extraordinary resilience, fragility, and mystery of human life. It's about being present for moments when the impossible becomes possible, when hope survives against all odds, when life finds a way to continue, even when every medical textbook says it shouldn't. 2 years after that October night, I received another update from the Chen family. Robert had started a support group for cardiac arrest survivors. Linda had become a volunteer patient advocate at our hospital. Their daughter had decided to go to medical school, inspired by what she'd witnessed during her father's recovery. But perhaps the most remarkable update came from Sarah Martinez, the paramedic. She had been accepted into medical school and was planning to specialize in emergency medicine. In her personal statement, she wrote about a cardiac arrest case that taught her that sometimes the most important part of saving lives happens in the moments when medical intervention appears to have failed. "I learned that being a healthcare provider isn't just about the lives we save," she wrote. "It's about being faithful to the process, about showing up completely even when outcomes are uncertain, about creating space for possibilities that we might not understand, but that might understand us." As I write this, it's been 3 years since Robert Chen's heart stopped beating for over an hour and then mysteriously started again. I still can't provide a medical explanation for what happened that night. I've stopped trying. What I can tell you is this. That case transformed not just my practice of medicine, but my understanding of what it means to be human. It taught me that certainty, while valuable, isn't the highest virtue in medicine. Humility is. Wonder is. The willingness to say, "I don't know," while remaining fully present to whatever unfolds. some things belong not only to science, but to life and faith. Some things can't be measured or replicated or published in peer-reviewed journals, but they can be witnessed, honored, and allowed to change us in ways that make us more human, more compassionate, and more open to the mysteries that surround us every day. Robert Chen came back to life in ways that no medical textbook can explain. But perhaps more importantly, witnessing his return to life brought me back to something I'd lost along the way, a sense of awe at the profound mystery of existence, and a renewed commitment to serving that mystery with whatever knowledge, skill, and presence I can offer. If this story touched you, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. You're not alone in wondering about the mysteries that medicine sometimes encounters. And sometimes, in sharing these stories, we discover that the most important healing happens not just in hospital rooms, but in the connections we make when we're brave enough to admit that some things are bigger than our understanding, and beautiful because of it. The human heart, it turns out, knows things that medical monitors can't measure. And sometimes, when we stop trying to control every outcome and simply show up with our whole selves, we become witnesses to miracles that remind us why we chose medicine in the first place. Not just to cure, but to serve the sacred mystery of life itself.